These are their stories.
Hello and welcome to Intoxicated Masculinity, where we talk about drinking culture, pop culture, politics, and anything else that comes up. Joining me as always is Kale.
Hello.
Brandon.
Hello, my people.
And Jim.
Hello, everybody.
Today we go back to another very, very uncontroversial, happy subject. The criminal justice system in this here country. But before we get depressed, let's start getting drunk. Kale, what are you having?
I am having some vino. I'm not going to reveal the brand, but
Is it
it's a
secret?
Cabernet Sauvignon that I picked up at a local establishment.
It's
Out of
Aldi brand.
Out of a plastic goblet. We'll call it a goblet.
This is a trophy. Every time I get out of the hospital, I keep the little plastic cup they give me.
I think I actually have a couple of those too. Brandon, what are you having?
I'm just having a rum and coke.
Rum and Coke. Which rum are you using? Is it a rummy rum?
I think it's actually kind of old now. I think we used it in one of our rum tastings.
Lay down.
It can't be seen.
Barcello, Dominican rum.
Fair
I
enough.
think your cloaking device in your spaceship is messing up.
Yeah, sorry.
Jim?
I am having 10-year scotch.
Glenmorangie. And
Not
I
bad.
am, oddly enough, also having a 10-year scotch, except this one is Lefroy. And you can tell the bottle's green because that looks really weird. Because it's
It smells delicious.
smoky and acrid, just like our criminal justice system. So I guess this is another one of those topics where there's so many things we're never going to cover all of them. We've all done some research on a few areas that we'd like to talk about. I'm kind of going to break it down as best we can and then kind of do some mop up at the end for things that maybe we didn't talk about. But maybe first going to go around the horn a little bit and just see like what you researched and what your initial thoughts are. Kale, why don't you start off?
Well, I just kind of really at first went with nuts and bolts, just getting some numbers, getting some definitions, things like that. And then I started diving a little deeper, looking at, how it affects real people in the real world, looking at some of the issues that we're going to be dealing with or that we are dealing with in the current system. A few little fun facts, and I've also come up with a handful of specific cases that I think would be interesting to look into for any of our viewers who haven't heard of them.
All right, Brandon, what about you?
Well, I was originally going through the list of links that you guys were putting together. And there's, a lot of things that stood out, but I didn't want to kind of cover all the basic stuff. And I really wanted to talk about prisons, but that got kind of overwhelming. So, we're doing a separate episode on prisons.
That should be a really fun episode.
Yeah, that one won't be depressing. But the thing that stuck with me most is something that another podcast was talking about, prosecutors and the way they are portrayed. They were saying that, in the past through like the 70s and 80s, you had TV shows about defense attorneys, people helping the people, you had Matlock and Raymond Burr. I forget his name. But, you
Perry
had
Mason.
Perry Mason, yeah.
I only
So you had
remember
all
because of the
these
Ozzy
shows-
Osbourne song.
So you had all these shows about defense attorneys helping the accused and making sure that innocent people didn't get sent to prison. And then somewhere along the lines, probably about the time that Law and Order started, we started getting shows from the prosecutor side, and the prosecutor being shown as this kind of hero of the people, that goes out and always gets the bad guy and gets the right bad guy. And honestly, I've come to the point where a couple of things have started to occur to me. One, I would much rather a bad guy go free than an innocent person go to prison. And I think that any time you have a relationship that has a power imbalance in it, something should be done to rectify that. I think this probably goes back to cops, but I don't think cops should even be allowed to ask you if they can search your car. I think it's just a straight up no. They're not allowed until they get a warrant. I think that should be for anything. And I think this goes the same way in prosecutors. I don't think prosecutors should be able to throw out this, oh, if you cooperate and tell us what, we won't even have to go to a judge. You know, you can just give us the plea bargain. That's the name of it. I don't think that, I mean, that's a total power imbalance. They don't even have to go through the process of proving that you're guilty. It should be, the onus should be on them. It should be difficult on them. It should be time consuming and hard, and you should have to have all your ducks in a row or it's just thrown out. To me, that's the way the justice system should work, and it doesn't. And that's the part that intrigued me the most.
Yeah, it's really interesting how it's something that I don't think any of us, well, at least I didn't anyway, I'll speak for myself, didn't really notice that change. You sort of just like, well, it's, you go from, you know, again, Perry Mason and Matlock to, you know, CSI, where you have these magical lab workers that always find the evidence, which, you know, looking back on that stuff, most of those things they were doing are absolutely unscientific entirely. I mean,
Totally fake.
they're saying now that even fingerprinting is not quite as you know, quite as reliable as they seem to originally think. And all the, you know, like the bite mark stuff and the follicle stuff, like most of that stuff is basically modern day phrenology.
Yeah, very much so.
It was treated as this sort of, oh, now we can find anybody because we have this magical thing. And it turns out there's actually no magical way to solve a crime. You know,
well, and then
solving crimes
people
are
on the
difficult.
jury have watched those shows, and now all of a sudden they're thinking, well, you know, they had the dusting of the hair follicle, and now you know that guy's guilty.
Well, hold on.
That's just made up shit.
But
Hold on. Let's go to Jim, and I wouldn't mind talking about that a little more. Let's get Jim's kind of initial thoughts. We might start off there with. Oh.
Sorry about that, guys.
I amped up the dog. Sorry.
Uh, so one of the things that struck me in the readings was the overcriminalization of misdemeanors. I did not really know that if you were charged with a misdemeanor, you often typically don't qualify for a public defender. And so a lot of times people are threatened with jail time over these things, and they just plea guilty so that the prosecutor can get a check mark of a guilty plea and they can avoid jail time. And but then it's on their record. Have some thoughts about the forensic junk science that we were just talking about. It seems like cashless bail is a huge political issue this year. I've actually had somebody bring it up to me in casual conversation about how scary cashless bail is.
That seems like such a no-brainer too. For most of the people who can't afford, like most of us, you know, that statistic that we can't afford like a $400 emergency, cashless bail, just getting rid of cash bail seems like such a no-brainer. And so many people are just dead set against it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
one thing people need to understand about cashless bail, that does not mean that you cannot hold people and imprison people pre-trial. That is absolutely not what that means. You just have to go to the judge. You have to say, look, this person is dangerous and we don't believe they should be released pre-trial because they have a danger of committing more crimes. All as you're doing is what you're taking out of the equation is the money aspect of it. And you're just saying, okay, people are either going to get pretrial release or they're not going to get pretrial release. And you take the monetary side of it away.
Yep, exactly.
Anyway, we'll stop interrupting Jim and his initial thoughts.
That's all right. So I've spoken to my wife is involved in a reentry program for people that have been released from prison. So I've been involved with that in the past, and kind of talked to her a little bit this week about some of the issues that have come up from that experience. I think Brandon brought up something really interesting with him saying that he would rather see bad guy go free than an innocent man go to prison. And I think that is a very telling question to put to people, because I have actually had this conversation in the past and been floored that there are people that think the other way around. I mean, people can think different things, but it boggles my mind that some people are so concerned with safety that they would rather see innocent people go to prison than a guilty person go free.
My guess is they never pictured that happening to them.
Right.
Well, and to be fair on that, you're never going to develop a system where only guilty people get put in jail and innocent people never get put in jail. Like you're always going to have a system run by human beings, and it's always going to be imperfect. But I think what we're saying is that you should always err on the side of innocence, which is what, you know, I don't agree with founding fathers and everything, but that's the way the Constitution is written. It's written to err on the side of people.
Well, for me, it just sets my justice meter completely off. The idea of someone innocent sitting in prison really bothers me tremendously more than someone walking around not getting convicted. That happens all the time. Like, I don't know.
Well, and you can do a lot to mitigate the occurrences of that happening by lowering the amount of laws that you have, getting rid of the drug war, getting rid of mandatory sentencing, you know, having like, you know, judicial watch, police, you know, a citizens police watch. These kind of things could really lower the amount of all around convictions altogether, which would also lower the amount of innocent people going to jail. And if you just made it hard, like I was thinking about the public defender thing. Like, let's say you said, like, the government, maybe it would have to be the federal government, would say, okay, not only do you get a public defender, but we will pay top attorney fees for the first like 2 years out of college if you come and defend people, or just maybe forever. You know, we'll pay top dollar, not just, you know, bottom of the barrel. We'll try and correct this power imbalance. Like, if you can't afford a lawyer, we'll get you the best lawyer there is.
Well, I mean, one of the problems with, I think it's the profession of law, not really the problem with the profession of law, more with the problem with our capitalist system. If you graduate top of your class from Harvard Law, you're going to go be a corporate lawyer because that's where the money is. That's just, I mean, admittedly, there's a few that don't, you know, there's a few of, you know, top in their class at the most prestigious law firms that don't do that, but the vast majority do. And, you know, unfortunately, when you get down to the people that take the public defender jobs, which they do not pay anything, you get your Saul Goodman. And that's really, really unfair, because that means the people, who and again, by the way, we should do an episode on schooling at some point, because bad grades doesn't mean you're a bad person or not intelligent. There's people that didn't get great grades. That doesn't mean they're not good at their job. But by and large, if you have people that are graduating top in their class that are all going to work for corporate law firms, and the people that graduated in the bottom of their law firms going to be, you know, public defenders, that shows you that people that are in need of public defenders are going to be maybe not represented as well as they could. And so it introduces this you know, economic inequality, which, you know, our society has so many of those, but just another one of those where if you're poor and you don't have the money to get, you know, your Johnny Cochran's, RIP, then you have a very low likelihood of getting really, really solid representation.
So you say, go where the money is.
Well, but like, and the if the federal paid for the attorney that comes and defends everybody, then nobody can outpay the federal government. I mean, we could do that. We could spend money on that kind of thing, and it would still be less than, you know, bomber planes and shit. And that might, especially if we paid like exorbitant fees on a lawyer to come help every single person, it might encourage decriminalizing a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Just briefly, I want to go back to the one that you talked about, because I think this is really important. I remember watching a lot of those because I grew up in sort of the Law and Order world. I mean, I think Law and Order came out in the it must have been like mid to late 80s, right?
I think mid to late, right?
And that's sort of when I was, growing up and and you would see these things. And every single time, not every single time, the vast majority of the times, the prosecutor is humanized and is this person who's just trying to do the right thing and get justice and all this. And the defense attorney is always this high paid, guy with, driving a Maserati and just loving the fact that he's getting guilty people off.
Yeah, you get them off on like a technicality, and they always got the smarmy, smug look to them. Like, yeah, you're not good at your job like I am. Instead of people that actually want to help people.
I mean, first of all, there is no such thing as a technicality. I hate that. I think it's so dumb. If somebody is let off because they weren't properly Mirandized and the police conducted an illegal interrogation, that's not a technicality. That's the police were intimidating a witness and were depriving somebody of their rights. That's not a technicality. That means the police were abusing their authority, and that person should get off.
It's a good point. Never even thought of it that way.
But yeah, Kale, I don't know. Did you watch a lot of those shows when you were coming up? Your Laws and Order, your Dick Wolfs, if you will.
I know of them. I wasn't necessarily a fan of any of them.
Well, you're a better person than I am.
However, I wanted to kind of spew some of the stuff that I came up with.
Spew away.
So just a nuts and bolts definition of what the justice system is. A system designed to enforce laws, ensure public safety, deliver justice to those who commit crimes, which is comprised of government bureaus, private agencies, and overarching policies. Now, in that definition, do you guys already have problems?
Yeah, a little. The first one that really stands out is what is meant by justice in that. Like when you say I delivered justice to people who commit crimes, what does that mean?
Well,
It sounds like they're getting an Amazon package. What is in the package? What is justice delivered?
Makes me think of Rainn Wilson screaming, "Shut up, crime," and hitting somebody with a wrench.
I mean, I think that this comes down to one of those times where it's like, okay, say someone did commit a crime. The punishment should be equal to the crime.
I'm sorry, is punishment even a goal we should be looking for?
You're right on that. Let's say the reconciliation should be of equal value as the crime that someone committed.
Well, I think that what Brandon's saying and kind of what especially a lot of the people in the Nordic countries would say is, how do you make things better? And so, for example, the real metric by which, and we'll talk about this, next time we talk about prisons, how do you make sure that somebody who committed a crime doesn't commit another crime? If somebody committed armed robbery and, robbed a gas station or a bank or whatever they robbed, how do you have a system in place that makes sure that that person is not going to rob that gas station or that bank, and that we discourage other people from robbing anything?
You can't commit armed robbery if you don't have arms.
Well, that is certainly one way. Except that is excessive use of state violence. But I think, again, my point is, how do you prevent that? And so the prevention of recidivism should really be the goal of any sane justice system, where, like, how do you, when somebody's committed a crime, and again, I am not a prison abolitionist and I'm not a police abolitionist. I think that there is always going to be a need for that in some form or another, but our goal should be reducing prisons and reducing police as much as possible through the use of just preventing the incentives and re-educating people and creating an equitable economic system. But in this country, unfortunately, what we care primarily about is punishing. Hence the reason we have police officers with Punisher skulls, which I never thought I'd fucking see.
Right. Unbelievable. And as a society, I feel like we never talk about the cost of policing, the cost of jailing. Like it seems like it's a whatever it takes is fine kind of thing. Whereas everything else is, we don't have money for that. We don't have money for that. We don't have money for that. Whether or not, like, helping with social safety net programs, helping with education programs, helping with economic opportunity, even, you know, we live in a capitalist society. You would think if you got more bang for your buck from helping make sure kids could read, kids were fed, kids had a secure neighborhood, prevented crime, that we would do that. But instead, like you were saying, we're so focused on punishing, regardless of the expense. Even if it was half as expensive to reduce crime by spending on making our country better, we won't do that because we don't have money for that. But we have money for lots more prisons and lots more police and lots more putting people in jail.
While we're on this subject, and I know this is part 2 of our 3-part series. First part was on police. This part is on the court system, basically, and then third part's going to be about prisons. I just want to point out, since you guys have now kind of notated on this, so I'm not going to get too deep into this. I just want to throw a few things out there. As far as incarceration goes, so because we're talking about punishing and not really rehabilitating, we're not really talking about personal growth or making someone a better person. We're just talking about putting them in a cage and making money off putting them in that cage. In the last 100 years, the inmate population has grown exponentially. The last 40 years alone, it's grown by more than 500%. The US only accounts for 5% of the world's total population, and yet we still account for 25% of all its inmates, which is more than any country everywhere. And it's around 2 million people in cells. And
Not in cells, people in cells.
Right.
Now we can argue about whether incels should be in cells, but that's maybe a topic for another day.
But yeah, and then just to add to that, you guys kind of touched on the war on drugs. You kind of brought it up for a minute. And since talking about people who have been incarcerated, even though people who have been incarcerated for low-level drug crimes still account for the majority of people who are in jail or prison, over the years, states and other government bodies have tried to reduce sentences. California in 2014, New York in 2009, the U.S. Sentencing Commission in 2014, and Congress even passed a bill for the Fair Sentencing Act in 2010, all meant to reduce sentencing for low-level drug crimes. And Brandon mentioned I was on a roll too. Brandon mentioned something about well, maybe it'll come back to me. I'm sorry, you can edit that part out.
I don't edit.
Good.
Yeah, just kind of going on from what you're saying, Kale, just the two big numbers I think here in the US that are important to know are we incarcerate, like Kale said, a little over 2 million people.
I think
The only
it's more.
country that-
Isn't it more? I thought it was more than that.
I show 2,068,000, so it's roughly 2 million. And the next country that comes close is China at 1.69 million people, except for China has a population that's about 4 times the United States, 4 or 5 times the United States. And then India, or then Brazil and India. Brazil per capita is fairly big, but the main thing is the highest rates of incarceration. If you look at the top 10 countries, we're number 1 by a significant amount. And the next countries are Rwanda, Turkmenistan, El Salvador, Cuba, Palau, the British Virgin Islands, Thailand, Panama, and St. Kitts and Nevis. Well, you don't hear on this list, and nothing against those other countries, you don't hear any other big industrialized modern nation on that list anywhere near where we are as far as overall incarceration rates. Our incarceration rates are unreal. The other thing that's sort of strange is 10% of our prison population is female. And if you look at most other countries, that's like double what most other countries are as far as the female prison population. So, well, obviously the vast majority of the prison population is male. We have a greater percentage of women in prison than other countries do. So I guess that makes us more woke.
And then that brings me to another subject, since we're talking about the court system, jury duty, which I've done it a couple of times. I don't know if you guys, have you guys done jury duty?
Never have.
Never? Okay, well, I've gone a couple of times. And the purpose of your jury duty is to adjudicate a fellow human. So they're relying on you to decide the fate of this person who is apparently committed a crime. And so you take 12 people out of their daily lives, you're taking them away from work, oh no, and their family, which is more important. And not only that, you're using tax money to fund them going to that. And if the trial lasts for a while, you got to put them up in a hotel or whatever. And it's just, it seems like such a waste of time and funding, especially on some of the cases, because I mean, you have a right to a speedy trial, or you can request a jury trial. And some people request a jury trial for really just stupid stuff, and you're just wasting people's time trying to get out of something. And I get it, that's your right.
Good. That's what they should do.
And I'm not
It
saying,
should waste a lot of time and money.
but I'm saying a lot of these things could be things that don't need to be settled in a court. I mean, they should, I mean, it shouldn't even be like an issue.
Well, yeah.
Kayla, you bring up jury. The other thing I wanted to talk about, I don't know if Jim wants to talk about this maybe in a more expansive way.
Well, I kind of wanted to know, like, whether you feel like it's a good thing that we have juries or not.
I understand the practice
Like,
behind
They
it,
get overused.
but
I would look at juries the same way that Churchill talked about democracy. It's the worst system we have except for any other system. I think that the juries are often incredibly imperfect things. I don't know if there's a great alternative, because I don't like the idea of just a judge coming down and passing sentences. I think that seems not so great.
What if we also made the judge a random 12-person panel from off the street?
They'd make a reality show out of it.
I mean, why? I don't know. It makes me wonder, like, what else could we do to kind of democratize that? And it makes me wonder, like, what if we made a, all the jury was right off the street and you couldn't, like, the prosecutor couldn't even talk to him. And what if we made like a 3 or 4 person judge so you couldn't easily bribe just one?
Well, I don't think direct bribery is a particularly huge problem here in the United States. I think there's indirect bribery.
Well, no.
Judges that are invested in private prisons, which is corruption.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get into something else on juries, and this is kind of important. So we're definitely going to get into the racial element of criminal justice because it's, screaming us right in the face. But so kind of to start off with that, and this sort of shows us one of the innate problems with the American justice system, and that is racism in jury selections. So they've shown statistically, and I'll post some links to some statistics about this, that white juries are much more likely to convict and much more likely to give harsh sentences to Black and Latino defendants. And prosecutors and defense attorneys know this. And so during jury selection, prosecutors and defense attorneys can challenge jurors. And for some reason, it could be a good thing. Let's say a person comes on the stand and says, let's say you're trying Jim for murder, and somebody comes on this, as a potential juror and says, yeah, I fucking hate Jim. Jim stole my lawnmower. And it's like, well, we don't want that guy on the jury for Jim because that guy kind of hates Jim. And
Like
so there are valid reasons to challenge jurors during jury selection, during the voir dire process. But they have these things called preemptory challenges. And in preemptory challenges, prosecutors don't have to, and defense attorneys too, don't have to give a reason why they're disqualifying a juror. They can just say, I want them out. And there was a really great example specifically, I think it was from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And this is about Mississippi District Attorney Doug Evans. District Attorney Doug Evans struck Black jurors 4.4 times more frequently than white jurors over the course of his nearly 30-year career. So he's literally coming out here and disqualifying Black jurors because Black jurors are less likely to convict than white jurors. And they passed this thing called the Batson. It was a court case called Batson. You have a Batson challenge. So if you're a defense attorney and you believe that the prosecutors are disqualifying a juror simply because of their skin color, you can challenge them. Unfortunately, the problem with that process is all the other attorney has to do is come up with literally any other rationalization why they struck those jurors. And the example they gave in a Vox piece that I have linked below, the attorney basically said, I thought those people were suspicious of police. And that's
Right.
enough to pass the Batson challenge. So the Batson challenge basically doesn't exist. I don't know, Jim, what do you think about that?
It sounds a little bit like the NFL hiring policy. Like it's supposed to be supposed to help correct racist tendencies, and it's just window dressing. It doesn't actually do anything. So it seems to me like, why do they even need to know the race of the jurors? Like, it seems like we have, teleconferencing technologies now. What, maybe they shouldn't even be able to see the jurors until they pick the 12 that are seated. Because I don't know how else you get around it.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see if the jury selection process was done like in writing, for example.
Exactly.
So they could never actually see the jurors. But I mean, it currently, like I said, it happens all the time. It's apparently a incredibly endemic problem, which again is one of these stumbling blocks in the criminal justice system against Black and Latino defendants. Currently, Black people are six times more likely to be incarcerated. Latinos are 3 times more likely to be incarcerated. It's bad. It's not good. It's bad.
Well, and if your goal is truly to avoid recidivism, like you were saying earlier, and conservatives are always on about how much money we're spending on something, then doesn't it seem like this is not the ideal system? And if it's not the ideal system to do either one of those things, what is it the ideal system to do?
Well, it's the ideal system to get private corporations to donate money to Republican politicians and get them reelected.
It's also an ideal system to basically reinstate slavery. I mean, sure, you're paying prisoners a daily wage, kind of.
Well, yeah,
But it's
very,
pretty
very
close.
kind of.
But it's
like
pretty close.
70 cents a day or something.
It's basically work for nothing for as long as they got you.
And they charge you to be in the cell. They charge you. When you get out, you get a bill. But we'll cover that when we talk about prisons.
Very unsatisfied with the service.
And I just want to, real quick, since you were talking about people of color, there was a quote in one of the articles that I listed down below is one of my sightings. And it said that people of color bear the brunt of this I'm paraphrasing here, this dysfunctional criminal justice system. Just let me start over. Edit that part out. Bear the brunt of this dysfunctional criminal justice system. And you may argue the source of these disparities, but you cannot argue that they don't exist. And I think that is important as well, because some people just refuse to see it. They act like it's not real, like it doesn't happen, but it does often.
So this reminds me of something that just popped into my head this week, and I have no idea why it popped into my head this week, but I hadn't thought of it for years, but I remember after Barack Obama got elected, that there were, I feel like every week I was hearing someone say, this just proves that there's no racism in America. And look how far we've come.
There's an article from the Sentencing Project that has a quote in here that I really liked. And this is sort of talking about, now, again, we have had an uptick in crime over the last year or two, which shouldn't be ignored. I think some people on the left try to just ignore the fact there's an uptick in crime, but there has been. I don't think it's catastrophic. I think it's not, it's definitely nothing like we saw in like the 1970s, but crime is currently up, and I don't want to gloss over that. But for a long time, going from the 1990s all the way up into the 2020s, or 20 teens and then into 2020, we had significant decreases in crime year on year, like every year we had just crime going down. And so in this report, they say these double standards are, of course, not explicit on the face of it. Criminal law. Wait a minute, I'm reading the wrong thing. Sorry.
Edit that out.
I'm reading my quotes. Stop saying edit. Nobody's editing anything.
Cut.
No one is editing. I got to find the, oh, here it is. No, I was reading the right thing. Edit it back in.
Edit that out then.
I'm talking to the non-existent editor because it's me and I'm not going to. Yeah,
Editing, Mike. Put that back in.
these two coinciding trends present provocative contrast, illustrating the conflicting manner in which changes in crime and punishment over the past few decades have impacted socioeconomic inequality in the United States. As we will show, crime rates declined the most in poorer and minority cities. And here he's talking about during that period of crime decline from the 1990s into the 2010s. Declined most in poorer and more minority cities within cities in the poorest neighborhoods. So during this time period, we see crime decreasing the most in poor cities and in poor neighborhoods inside the poorest cities. In other words, the benefits of crime, the benefits of the crime decline have been progressively distributed. So the crime decline has actually helped the places where the crime had previously been the highest. So you see a progressive impact on crime decline. By contrast, the social costs created by an unprecedented expansion in the correctional populations have been regressively distributed, with poor and disproportionately minority males, African-American males in particular, being most directly impacted, and poor and minority families disproportionately bearing the collateral social costs of the stiffening of U.S. sentencing policy. So in other words, them talking about crime on the increase right now, set that aside for the moment. If you see over the course of the 30-year period from 1990 to 2020, in poor and minority cities and in poor neighborhoods in those cities, you have crime going down the most in any place in the country. And yet those populations are the most impacted by increases in sentencing. Again, that doesn't make any sense. If crime is going down in those areas, we should see less people being incarcerated from those areas, but we don't. We see more people being incarcerated from those areas.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
It doesn't.
Well, and again, that makes me wonder, what is the system really designed for?
I mean, I think that largely the system is designed for the protection of property. I watched there's a great quote from George Carlin, where he talks about, if you want to know the difference between people on the left and people on the right, is that people on the left are concerned with people and people on the right are concerned with property.
Yep.
And there's a difference between private property and personal property. Private property usually applies to people who have like businesses and things like that.
Jim, I don't know. What do you think about this idea, this disparity of poor and again, we sort of talked about this as the disparity in the racial disparity in criminal justice system, but it's also significantly affected by class as well.
Right. So I could see someone playing devil's advocate with those statistics and say, you've got it completely backwards. Maybe crime went down in those areas because people were being more heavily incarcerated in those areas. I would highly doubt that's true, but I could see somebody making that argument.
We tell them that correlation is not necessarily causation. And I think the burden would be on them to show that all of a sudden putting 2 million people in prison had a decrease on crime when crime was already decreasing before we started this carceral state. You know, crime had already started to decrease in the 90s before you get this mass incarceration starting.
Yeah, so this kind of gets back to something I was saying earlier, that I feel like there's too little emphasis in our country from a just even selfish, what's the best bang for our dollar, of lifting up areas that are so hard hit economically, whether they're, you know, areas of you know, white people who are not doing well, areas that are racially diverse, what have you. It's just, there's so much crime that is driven by people who don't have very good choices to make. I mean, sure, there's people that are just bad, that make bad choices, people that are not well mentally, but a lot of the problems in our society are people that don't have any better choices.
Yeah.
And
I think it starts with community. And I really kind of overarching here, like people who live in a society where they feel secure in their life, like they feel fairly safe, they feel like they can get food and water and housing and stuff like that, don't need to commit crimes because they're getting everything they want. All they need is these few simple things, basic things that people need to live.
Okay, I
And
think one thing to tie off of that, I think it's important to look and see, why do people commit crimes? Like what crimes are committed? Because like all crimes aren't committed for the same reason. You know, I mean, for example, let's say,
usually out of desperation.
well, not always, but I think there's a variety of reasons why people commit crimes. I mean, for example, there is, like you say, there is desperation crime, people that literally do not have enough money or don't have any options to feed themselves and their families. That's one sort of. Then there's also people, you know, that have some kind of a, you know, compulsion. And I don't know what the right word for that is, but
Kleptomania.
with that, or you know, various sort of sexual crimes where it's definitely something that's some kind of a mental illness or something that is compelling them to do these things.
They're kind of
And-
rapey.
And in those cases, I think like there's really no sense in trying to tell those people they shouldn't commit crimes because they have a mental compulsion. And there's probably not much you're going to do as far as like stricter sentencing that's going to prevent somebody who is, you know, one of those people who to prevent that from committing that crime.
So they need a mental health expert.
Well, they need possibly to be an inpatient somewhere or something like that, and just to keep themselves safe and to keep other people safe as well. And then you have what I would sort of call your greed crimes, you people that are already millionaires that are stealing money anyway, and that's sort of maybe what I think is kind of the grossest crime. And people that have everything they're ever going to need and want to commit crimes anyway, just to make themselves a little bit richer.
isn't that just
I have heard
capitalism?
Well, one could argue.
I've heard it stated before, and I will say up front that I've only ever been able to find one source for this, but I've heard it said before that wage theft is the #1 crime in the US if it got counted.
I believe that's correct.
Believe that. 25% of all shrinkage is caused by employees.
Oh man. Have you seen some of those employee anti-theft videos? Those things are hard to watch.
You saw Bob slide $10 out of the till and put it in his pocket. You better cost him his job.
Go, Bob, go.
I was just watching, I don't know, I'm a big fan of the Jenny Nicholson who does various she's kind of, very specialist YouTuber who does these very, very long video essays. She just recently, if you've got the time, a 4-hour video on the Evermore theme park in Utah, which I found to be very entertaining. But it's sort of, as a serious note, and we're getting a little far afield from the crime, but the company is literally asking people to come in on their day off to do volunteer work and do like yard work. Well, that's, in my mind, that's wage theft. I mean, you're trying to get people, and then like apparently they got afraid they were going to be called on that, so they started having these like parties, but they were parties where like they're scraping paint or something.
Great.
Sounds
No,
like
bring
a great party.
pizza.
Well, yeah, they'll have like pizza
you
and like
throw
some
in some
sodas, and then
pizza,
like
it'd be
they put
cool.
in an 8-hour day of working, and it's like that's theft. But again, and this is I think the bigger implication of all this stuff. We talk about the racial aspect, and I think the class aspect is much more important because if I go and steal a bag of chips from Come and Go is going to call the police are going to come arrest me. If Walmart steals $100 million worth of labor from their employees, then it's got to go to the Justice Department, or it's got to go to a class action lawsuit. So for at least corporations, there is no justice. It's certainly no criminal justice anyway for most people.
Well, and even if they're ever, I mean, on the slim chance they're ever brought to court, they'll just use a small percentage of all the ill-gotten gains they have to pay off whoever interested party they need to shuffle some money to.
It's like if I robbed a bank and stole $100 million and was like, okay, I'll pay $1 million fine, and the guys and the prosecutor's like, okay, good, that's fine.
I hope you learned your lesson.
And I was like, yes, I in fact did learn a lesson.
But let's circle back to where we were talking about, was punishment the
Now, if
goal?
you excuse me, I'm heading to a bank.
Should these CEOs who do this be punished? Or should they be?
But in our system, they never will be. There's times where people will say, oh, I want to see Donald Trump go to jail. That's never going to happen. We don't have a system that punishes privileged, white, rich people.
Jim, what
We
do you
don't
think?
have that.
What was that?
What do you think of the idea of sort of the class divide? And there's actually more than just the class, because the class divide would be a rich person's, experience of criminal justice versus a poor person's. Here, I'm talking about the difference between a poor person's experience of criminal justice and a corporation's experience of criminal justice.
Well, one thing I would say about just in general, the wealth disparity in the criminal justice system. I think a lot of the criminal justice system is meant to protect property, not to protect people. It's kind of something we touched on a little bit before.
Private property, not personal property.
And so it disproportionately targets people who are on, the very low end of the economic spectrum, and not people on the top end of the economic spectrum. The other thing I was going to say is we were kind of talking about bribery, but some of this is not even so much of the things that happen in our country are not even really considered bribery. Like I saw today that total spending on the election, which is happening today whenever this gets posted, but the election happened today. Total spending nationwide was like 17 billion, and the news report that I saw was talking about how it was so much higher than any other time before. And I sat there thinking, wow, I bet the companies that spent a lot of money on that are really getting good return on their investment. I mean, think about all the money that the federal government, state government, local government spend, and they often are choosing how to spend that money, what companies to hire, to do roads, to run prisons, to build fighter planes. I mean, we're talking trillions and trillions of dollars, and the total spending for the election was, 17 billion.
The best investment in the world is buying a politician.
Right.
There has to be a return on investment, or smart business people wouldn't do it, right?
Jim, I was going to bring up the statistics, the one that's behind you. Can you talk about that a little bit? And by the way, I know we're kind of going a little all over the place in this one. It's a very big topic. I know we're not going to cover everything. And so we're going to kind of try and hit as many things as we can. But I think that statistic is really important.
Yeah, so this chart behind me is talking about the growth in total jail population. So you can kind of see where the lines start splitting. The orange line on the top is not convicted people. The yellow line is convicted people. For a
And what
long
year is
time,
that?
what's that?
What year do they start to really separate?
25 years ago. You do the math, sometime in the late 1990s. So those two statistics kind of went hand in hand with one another for a long time. And then about 25 years ago, they really started to split. And so over the last 25 years has been a large growth in the number of people that are in jails. But almost all of that growth, as you can see from the chart, is people that are not convicted. So these are people that have been arrested and can't get bail, which is why there's been there had been a movement, a bipartisan movement to reduce or eliminate cash bail. And now all of a sudden, I see there's ads all over the place saying, people love criminals. People, the only reason we have a crime problem is because they got rid of bail. And it's kind of mind-boggling to me, because if the people on this chart could afford bail, they'd be out, right? Like it's not like the judge is saying you are a risk, you can't be released. Most of these people do qualify for bail, they just don't have the money to do it. So they're sitting in jail instead. I mean, I don't understand how it's any different than debtor's prison, right? They're saying you have to pay this money, and if you can't, you have to sit in jail. Which is something that causes a lot of people to plead guilty to crimes, because often what will happen is these people will sit in jail indefinitely, and then the prosecutor will come and say, hey, guess what? You've been in jail longer than the sentence that you would get, so why don't you just plead guilty and we'll let you go? And why would you not plead guilty at that point? But then
Debtor's prison is something that could only be invented by a capitalist, by the way.
But this isn't debtor's prison. I mean, this is sort of like, in some ways even worse than debtor's prison. Because I mean, that means we are literally putting in, I think it strikes me that the number is about 500,000, I think, or 450,000 people that are currently in jail, but have not been convicted of a crime.
Right.
Now, again, I'm not saying that all pretrial detention should be banned. Far from it. I mean, when you catch, Son of Sam or Charles Manson, he probably shouldn't be released on his own recognizance. I mean, but then again, that's why you make the argument to the judge and say, hey, judge, this guy's nuts. This guy's, he's a bad guy and he needs to stay in prison. You could take care of that. But again, as we sort of started off talking about, when you just say, okay, you can get out of prison if you have X amount of money, or you can go to a bail bondsman, which is just one of the most unethical professions that I can imagine. Because there you pay 10%, but you just pay it. Because remember, bond is supposed to be something you put down and then get back. But you can go to a bail bondsman, you put down 10% and he just keeps it. I mean, it's incredibly profitable. And those people who I'm sure consider themselves to be very good for the community are the scummiest people on earth. And the other thing, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you look at this chart, if the orange lines and the yellow lines didn't diverge, you'd still have 250,000 people in jail that weren't convicted, just not 500,000. Like, it just seems completely odd that there's twice as many people in jail that have not been convicted as people that are convicted. It boggles my mind.
Because they figured out that if you get a couple $100 from a lot more people, then you can get $1,000 from this many people. it's worth it in the long run to keep those people in this little metal box and make them pay us.
And like you were saying, and gets into another thing that we really should talk about. It puts such a pressure on the accused person, because if you're in prison, you've been in prison for 2 years, and all of a sudden the prosecutor, like you said, comes and says, "Hey, go ahead and just confess, plead guilty, and we'll go ahead and let you have time served." Well, now this person's got a felony record, which is going to follow them the rest of their life, may take away their voting rights, because in this country, a lot of places we disenfranchise felons, which has never been explained to me why. I mean, that wasn't always the case. I mean, why do you lose your right to vote? Because you're in jail. You don't lose your right to free speech. You don't lose your right to a lot of things,
That
but you
there's a
lose your right to vote. Anyway,
there's-
kids, hold on a second. So then it then leads to this thing where you have a lot of plea bargaining that happens in this country. And I found a really great quote. I'm never finding the quotes that I need to find. So when they were talking about the idea of, and this is somebody in the system, if we had to collect, review, and produce in every case, or even a subset of cases where the defendant thought there was a legal or factual defense, given the high volume of cases, it would bog the entire system down. So in other words, they're saying, well, if we actually went through and did due diligence on all these cases, then it'd be a mess. And it's like, okay, well, then isn't that a problem?
Right.
I mean, if you're saying we're doing all these plea bargains and we're fast tracking all these cases because it's convenient. The thing is, on the right, I hear all about them being focused on freedom and we need to be a free country. Well, they're just saying it's easier to put people in jail than it is to give them a fair trial.
And prison
that's insane.
Of all the things that should be fast tracked or convenient, putting people in prison is not one of them.
Well, I'm gonna also circle around something that I mentioned at the very beginning of the episode, and that is the overcriminalization of misdemeanor crimes. So a lot of these people on my chart that are not convicted and in jail aren't in jail because of felonies. They're in jail because they have misdemeanors, and they don't qualify for a public defender, so they don't have anyone advising them, and they could be in jail because they don't qualify for bail. And it's just really crazy to think that somebody could have to sit in jail for an indefinite period of time because they have a misdemeanor against them.
Yeah.
And along the same lines, what you'll see when prosecutors are trying to push people is they will add charges. They can add a bunch of charges on top of something to make it seem so much worse, to then get the person to plead back down. Brandon, you sort of talked about the old Law and Order shows. You see these people negotiating these plea bargains all the time. In the show, it's always the prosecutor is flustered that this person who's obviously guilty isn't entering this plea bargain, but that's not really the case in real life. Oftentimes it's poor people, and they're coming, and the prosecutor or somebody from the prosecutor's office will be telling them, we're going to charge you with 17 different crimes, putting you in prison for 35 years. You can plead guilty, and we'll give you 2 years in prison, and then you get out while your kid's still, before your kid gets into high school.
Well, you got a little lead in your pencil.
Because they might have added 6 charges on top of the charge that they got, and just to be intimidating.
What about they have mandatory sentencing? What about like some cap on the amount of years anybody can spend in prison? Like, say it's 5 years. No matter what the crime, only 5 years is all you can ever put somebody in prison for.
Well, there's actually a fair number of countries where 20 years is the maximum prison sentence for anything.
I mean, that still seems like a lot, but it's better than what we have. Like, life in prison should just be taken off the board altogether. That shouldn't be a thing.
So I can understand why people would have a problem with it. I will say from a practical standpoint, some of the things that I've read in the past have indicated to me that raising the number of years that are charged for various crimes does almost nothing to reduce people committing crimes, because what stops people from the people that can be stopped from committing crimes they are stopped by the fear of getting caught, not by the sentence. And so that means that we would need more neighborhood policing instead of people driving around in cars, more actual investigation, instead of, like Mike was saying, a lot of these cases, there's so many people in our system, we don't even have the resources to apply to most of these cases. And so there's so much pressure to just plea bargain almost everything, because there's so many people in the system that we don't have the resources to actually find out who committed the crime, take these things to trial, adjudicate it, provide ample public defenders. And instead we're just kind of, slapping everything together along the way, and only a few cases here and there get that full treatment.
Well, I think on top of that, in the law profession, like in many professions, it is sort of a numbers game. And the last thing that a prosecutor wants to do is lose a case or let somebody go. So there comes a tendency, I think, in a lot of these cases where it's just like, okay, get him to plead to something. Like, even if this person didn't commit a crime, even if, it was wrong across the board, like, get him to plead to some misdemeanor and give him, 18 months probation or something like that. We need to get him. We need to get him with something. Like, get them to sign for something. Even if you can't put him in prison, get him to sign on something. So we got him for something.
And that's a problem all the way up and down on the prosecution side. So it happens with the police departments too. Like, they all have stats that are being tracked. And so people, as soon as you start tracking stats, people juke the stats. And so they find ways to pump up their stats. And instead of the emphasis being on justice and, bringing people who truly committed the crime to justice, there's, like you said, there's too many incentives to just say, well, we have to charge someone with this, we have to get them to plead guilty to something, and then we can, check our box and move on, regardless of what the impact is on this person. And I think, in fairness to prosecutors and people in the police department, I'm sure that some of the times this happens, they think they're not dealing with, cream of the crop, upstanding citizens. Like, they probably think, well, maybe this guy didn't really commit this crime, but they probably committed other things that we didn't catch them for. But
Yeah.
that's not justice.
Well, and one other thing that they're also thinking about too is, in a lot of cases, those people are elected. And what they're terrified of is one of their opponents coming in and saying the most damaging thing you can say in this country, that they are soft on crime, whatever the fuck that means. And,
For years now, people, since like Joe Biden was in the Senate or whatever, you can find video of him in the 90s saying he'll be tough on crime. And it's like, had anybody had any guts to just stand up and say, nah, I'm going to be pretty easy on crime. I think crime is mostly a socio-economic thing created by our current capitalist system. And I'm going to go pretty easy on it. I'm going to reduce the amount of police.
The better thing is to come in and say, I want to solve the problems. Because I'll tell you what, here is the ultimate end all proof that all this tough on crime shit doesn't matter. We incarcerate more than any other nation on the planet, including nations 4 times our size. We have a prison population 4 times greater than India, which has a population 3 times the United States. So what I want to ask those people, did they think that somehow there is something inside Americans that makes us just deeply criminal, that makes us more criminal than any other people on the face of the planet? Because that's the only other explanation. Otherwise, we're just putting a bunch of people in prison for no reason. And putting them in an inhumane prison system, which we'll talk about later. So if imprisoning more people for longer worked to decrease crime, then we would have completely abolished crime by now, because we have the most harsh criminal justice system on the planet. and it's not really close.
You know, the next thing you're gonna say is more guns don't make us safer.
Can you
Crazy
imagine?
talk. Crazy talk.
Well, you know,
Like
in the
ju-
same way that violence isn't necessarily always physical, that violence can be speech and stuff like that. Would you say it's fair to say that we not only have an inhuman prison system, we also have an inhuman justice system?
Well, I mean, I think my thought is we don't really have a justice system.
Yeah, in that-
because again, if
However, we define justice, though, which goes back to what I was asking at the very beginning, but in whatever way I or you would define justice, yeah, we don't have that.
I mean,
we
a
don't even
justice
have that as a
system-
North
justice
Star.
system, in my mind, the main goal should be harm prevention. To
Right.
make sure the fewest people are harmed as possible. And in that case, we have something terrible. We have terrible recidivist rates. We have crazy prison population. We have inhumane prisons. We have inhumane police. If being tough on crime solved crime, then we wouldn't have crime. And there's just no other way to put it. Kale, we haven't got a chance to talk. I apologize.
It's okay.
Okay.
You guys are doing a good job.
Yay for us.
I don't know. There's so many things to deal with in this, and there's so many different angles. I mean, again, you talk about the interior of the criminal justice system from the perspective of people of color and people that are poor, or worse yet, people that are both. You talk about it from the perspective of corporations. You talk about it from the perspective of the rich. I mean, the things that, I mean, you look at real not high quality, high income examples of, Jeffrey Epstein, and Harvey Weinstein, and these other just rich people that had been doing awful things and had been reported for years, and took forever to face any consequences whatsoever. Versus people that commit relatively minor crimes. I mean, there's people in prison, in Texas and other places, they were caught with small amounts of LSD and were given like life in prison.
Isn't there a woman here in Iowa who was gone to prison for killing her, what is it, abuser, raper, kidnapper, something like that?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up, but it just shows this system that's, I mean, what does justice mean? And I don't know any definition by which you could define what we have here in the United States as living up to that definition.
What's the gal's name from the WNBA that's in Russia? Griner?
Oh, that's right.
Again,
Over-
another
over a
example
vape
where
pen? She had a vape pen in her bag.
and again, you have the party of freedom. And I've seen this multiple times, people saying they're glad she's in prison. And it's like, wait a minute, I thought you wanted freedom. All she did had was weed. Isn't that something you believe
Yeah.
she has freedom to? I would, just as a base note, and anybody whose watchword is freedom, be really careful, because they probably don't actually believe in freedom at all.
Well, we had the discussion of before too about freedom between conservative and what leftists think of it as, and I've imagined the same different meanings for justice depending on your right leaning or left leaning. Justice probably does mean punishment to a lot of right wingers.
I think justice means punishment to a lot of people.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
I think there's a certain fetishization of punishment.
A left winger in like such a defensive way. And I get that. I really do. So, and I've had that discussion before, and this is kind of off topic. But like when people, they're like, oh, love it or leave it. I'm like, no, I love it. And that's why I'm staying, because I'm going to fix it.
Stay in it and change it. Well, I don't know. I'm gonna kind of go around the horn one last time and get some kind of final thoughts. Again, I know we haven't covered all the topics, and this is a big topic, and I just kind of wanted to talk about some of the things that that we researched on there. And yeah, just below, kind of put below, we're gonna put a bunch of links down there. I'm also gonna put a link to donate to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. There's a bunch of good articles and stuff they've done. But yeah, Kale, do you have any kind of final thoughts on stuff we talked about?
Sure. Eliminate mandatory minimum sentences.
Very important. We didn't talk about that. But that's
Have
very important.
more community-based prevention. Examine and address policies and practices. And remove barriers that restrict people from getting their lives back before they were convicted of some crime. Specific cases for people to Google. The Bivens case, which was about illegal search and seizure. The Onion Supreme Court amicus brief, which is hilarious and really well put together. Texas versus Johnson, which was about flag burning. Santa Fe private schools versus the Department of Education about prayer in schools. And Roe v. Wade concerning the 14th Amendment on privacy.
Or maybe don't bother reading that one anymore.
No, you should definitely read it and think about it real hard.
Although one of the things that I think is important to note about that, and this is sort of in the realm of criminal justice, although maybe on the outskirts, and the standards set forth in Roe, I think is a good one as far as how you should look at abortion. But at some point in the last 40 years, the Democrats should have codified it into law. And that would have made this much more difficult. Having that
And
just
they had the opportunities to do so.
not a lot of opportunities, to be fair, not a ton, but they did have it. They could have done it
They
under
did have some.
Clinton, and they could have done it under Barack Obama for a couple of years there. It would have been tough, but I think they probably could have done it. But one of the things we talked about earlier and that Jim brought up is the idea of fundraising, and both sides fundraised like crazy off of Roe v. Wade. And that's, I think both sides were actually pretty happy for Roe to exist right like it was, so they could both fundraise from their respective bases.
That actually, on a side note, does make me wonder if that is gone, if Republicans ban abortion or whatever, that's one of the biggest single issue voter issues there is. If that is gone and settled, is that end up being bad news for Republicans?
Is that a stake in the heart?
No, they'll just go on the next thing. I mean, I think that, the ultimate irony is going to be when Clarence Thomas votes to overturn Loving, and they repeal interracial marriage.
Don't think he won't do it.
Because it won't apply to him, even though it would, which is funny. Kale, anything else?
No, just on that last comment though, it's like so. I mean, that seems to be just like the elephant in the room. That it seems like if you're wealthy and powerful, law doesn't apply to you.
Well, Amy, remember, right now we are not far from same-sex marriage and contraception being on the chopping block. You could live in a state that banned condoms. That is something that can absolutely happen in the next.
Well, okay, because I can't feel anything with that on anyway.
All right, Jim, on that depressing note, why don't you try to lift our spirits, or maybe make them fall further? One of the other.
So one of the things we touched on was felony disenfranchisement. And I just wanted to say one more thing about that. I watched a report that showed body cam video of cops in Florida enforcing their voting laws, where they went and found felons who illegally voted. And it was really disturbing, because almost everyone that they went and arrested for illegal voting said, but wait, I didn't illegally vote. I went to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and when I got my license, they said, you should sign up to vote. And I said, well, I'm a felon. I don't think I can vote. And they said, well, just fill out the application. And if you can't vote, they won't give you a voter ID. And I got my voter ID, so I assumed I could vote. And it's just, I know it's not just a Florida problem, because I've seen news articles about stuff happening in Texas and other places. I think the thing that's most disturbing for me about having felons not be able to vote is creating another crime. These people have gotten out of prison, they've served their time, they're free, and they're trying to exercise their constitutional rights just like everybody else, being a responsible citizen voting, and some of these people are being arrested and put back in jail for it.
I totally
just-
forgot to bring that up. That was fucking inhuman. And I think there are some very serious questions about whether that was entrapment, about whether they were actually trying to get these people to vote so that they could then arrest them. And I'll tell you, it was interesting. You saw the police that were going up to these people, and the police were like incredibly confused by it. Like this law was so awful, and it carried out in such a way, police were ashamed of it. Like the police were like, I don't really understand it, but they say you did this, and so we gotta arrest you. And I mean, DeSantis is an utter scumbag. I mean, they literally got people to come in and vote because they said they should, and then sent police to their door to arrest them for voting. If that isn't entrapment, I don't know what is. Just deeply gross. And I'm going to link to an article in that from the internet.
Brought to you by the man who sent a bunch of Venezuelans to Martha's Vineyard because he thought they were Mexican.
I've got a very special hatred for that man. And I do have to admit, I take a little bit of pleasure every time Trump makes fun of him, because I know that just hurts Ron DeSantis' black little heart.
He called him desanctimonious.
That's so stupid. He's such an idiot. It's not even clever.
Which one are you talking about?
Not to mention they're all sanctimonious assholes. Like,
Yeah.
how do you choose which one? That's like their brand. Anyway,
I heard he was running nicknames by his people to see which one was the best one. Which
Probably
one-
did. That probably was the best one.
all right, Jim, do you have anything else on that?
No, that was the last thing that I really wanted to touch on.
I'm glad you brought that up. I saw that too. That was just so
On
so
today of
deeply
all
gross.
day. Yes, felony disenfranchisement is the one to bring up because it involves your right to vote. And today is voting day.
Brandon, final thoughts.
I know I asked a couple of times what is meant by justice. There is, we'll try and get in the link down there. There is a book called Justice by, I believe he's a Harvard professor named Michael Sandel. I read it a long time ago and I probably need to reread it, but there is a online on YouTube entire lecture series that was filmed a few years ago where he goes, it was filmed in his class, but it's an entire thing. It's just called Justice Michael Sandel, just like the footwear. Look it up on YouTube. It's really good.
Sounds good. I don't really have any other final thoughts. Just, I mean, if there's one thing I can convince people of, don't be afraid first. I mean, the fear is a natural human emotion, and it is not something to be, it's not, shameful to be afraid of something, but you have to understand that politicians and businesses and corporations and all these people, they profit from people being afraid, because when we're afraid, we're not really thinking clearly.
If you wiped out unwarranted fear, you would wipe out the Republican Party.
I think that's pretty safe to say. But you do, when you are running away from something that you're afraid of, you are not able to properly process information. You are terrified. You're running for safety, and the Republican Party has us afraid of gay people, Black people, Latino people, trans people, people from other countries, liberals. I don't know,
Obamacare,
Flat Earth,
left-handed
chemtrails.
people. It's just it is
Ironically, taking care of other people.
it is an ideology of fear. And the reason why is because they can't get elected if you're not terrified. Because if you are properly processing information, then everything they're saying is ridiculous. So just stop, try and get yourself out of the fear and process information as in as level-headed as way as possible.
Travel to 3 different countries. You'll cure yourself of a lot of your prejudice and your fear.
Hell, travel to a different state, travel to a different city. That being said, I want to thank everybody for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and have a good drink, and have a good day.
You know what? You just need to shut up.